Thank you very much, Mehran. Thank you, Georgetown. Thank you, Gerd. Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, though the responsibility is huge, like of what you said, the expectations. So I hope I will not disappoint you and the audience. This is with my background in conflict resolution and teaching in conflict resolution here at Georgetown. I wanted to look at, and that's the conversation I had with Mehran, of how to reduce the tension in the region. And then there are two approaches basically to this. Either is that you go to these regional conflicts, to Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and you name it, and then start working on that. Or maybe you can use a different approach, which is either of going from the country to the center. Maybe you can take a regional approach, because most, if not all, of these conflicts in the region, they're linked in one way or another to Tehran and Riyadh, or to the Saudi-Iranian relationship. So said maybe then it's a more effective approach is actually to look or to take a regional approach, where if you're able to reduce the tension or achieve some rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, then, and by the time you bring them to the table to sit and talk and have some understanding, then probably 50% of the conflicts will disappear because things, will reflect itself on the conflicts in the region. So I thought this might sound, or this sounds like a better idea than going working on Lebanon, trying to fix a president for Lebanon for over a year and a half, and you're not able to do so. So that's how I said, this sounds like the right approach, and I'm going to use it. So the very first thing I said, okay, so it sounds like easy, so I wanted to pick a title for this, and I got stuck with the title, right? So I said, resolving, right, the conflict or resolving the tension. Resolving is too ambitious. I'm not sure if anyone is aspiring to achieve or reach a resolution. Right? Then I thought maybe managing, containing, regulating, right? So all these terms started to go in my mind about what is really the best term or the most accurate term is to have for the Saudi-Iranian relations. So after thinking about all the terms, I said, okay, I solved it. We're not going to go into resolution because it's too ambitious. We'll just go with managing. So I said, okay, we'll talk about managing the issues. And then I moved to the second part, is it the Saudi-Iranian or the Iranian-Saudi? Also, and I said, this is another problem, so we have to work on it. Right? And then thinking about it and having some conversation here and there, so I'm not sure I got anywhere, right? So I said, okay, we'll use Saudi-Iranian, Iranian-Saudi, it's not a problem. So we'll just keep switching or moving for now using Saudi-Iranian conflict. But then I said, okay, this is resolved. I said, okay, and then I continued with the title, and then I got stuck again, right, with it. Whether is it a conflict? Is it a dispute? Is it a rivalry? Between what is exactly the right terminology for the tension, Mehran called it, between Saudi Arabia and Iran, right? Some people are very against using the term conflict because it's not a conflict, right? But is it a dispute? But it's a dispute about what or over what? So there is also an issue. So again, with struggling with this, I finally achieved my goal and I got a title, right? Which is Managing the Saudi-Iranian Regional Rivalry for now, hoping that will be a good title or modest enough is that we can achieve something in it. So okay. The history, many of you are familiar with the history, so I won't spend time. I'm not coming to a history talk today, but obviously some important things to recognize. Before 1979, the relations were okay. With the Islamic Revolution and the concept of exporting the revolution, things started to go wrong, or things to go to the other side, and then Saudi Arabia backed Iraq in the war against Iran. Then, after the end of the Iraqi war, we saw good relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran during the 90s, and also till 2003, 4, 5, something like that. But then a major change or a turning point in the relationship, as many of you know, it was the 2003 and the American invasion to Iraq, and changing the regional order, where Iraq was taken out of the regional order, which things started to go wrong, and the situation continued to escalate, or started to escalate again between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But then in 2011, things got even worse. And that's why today most of the talks and most of the discussion, when you want to understand the conflict, right, or the situation, you always refer to these important stops about the history. This is more of like showing how the history before 79 was, and then we had the Iraq-Iran war, and then things improved over here, and then the Khobar Towers bombing was in 1996. Things went again with some tension, and then back again to normal, and then with 2009 especially, and then 2011, things started to change. The very big question that I am always asked by the media when I ask about this conflict, is this a sectarian conflict? Like, this is oversimplification of the conflict, where many are seeing, especially the Western media, the very first question that you're always asked, is it a sectarian conflict? Is it about Sunni-Shia conflict? Right? Then I started doing my research interview and asking scholars here, is it about sectarianism? Is it about Sunni-Shia? And then the first 10 interviews with the scholars here, not even one told me that this is a sectarian conflict. Right? So I said, okay, this is important. So obviously there are a number of reasons, right? And in conflict resolution, we always learned, if you're able to define or to determine the issues of a specific conflict, that's a huge achievement to managing or resolving the conflict. Because I'll tell you something, even within the different views that I heard from the different scholars, actually there is no agreement within the scholars that I interviewed, or even from Iranian or Saudi diplomats that I spoke with, is, we're able, or they have one set of understanding about the conflict. So even, especially in Iran, in the Iranian side, its answer is more clear than the Saudi. The answer is always, it depends who you talk to, right? So there is some huge intra-party issues or variation of views about the conflict. And if you're asking the hardliners, it's about this. If you're asking Hassan Rouhani, it's this. If you're asking Khamenei, then it's this. So this is what makes the conflict or the rivalry or the tension much more difficult and complicated to manage and to be able to work with, because the issues are not really clear, right? Not only to the outside world, so I don't blame those that they ask, is it always a sectarian conflict? It's much deeper than this, and even within the parties themselves, there is no clear understanding about what is the conflict is really about. So after a huge thinking and conversation, I thought maybe I got some ideas about what is the issues, or what are the issues of the conflict, or what are the parties are discussing or similar. So you see that there is security issue on both sides. that Iran has fear of U.S. and West attack or pressure, over the past, and also that there is security concern for Saudi Arabia about Iran's hegemonic aspirations of expanding in the region. So there is an underlying cause driving both sides, right, that we see. It's about security and fears and concerns over the security of the country. It's not only about this. So sectarianism is, as appeared as like one angle, or has a character, or is used the way actually that was described most of the time, is used to advance certain agendas. So sectarianism became another issue. Actually, I was having a conversation with a historian today, and you know what he told me? He said, don't listen to this sectarian security geopolitics analysis. That doesn't really matter, right? And I said, so what is it about? And he said, it's all about the history, right? Back about Cyrus the Great, 536, the timing BC. And then it's about the Qadisiyya battle. It's all about nationalism, right? Persian-Arab relations are really bad, since back in the history. And it's a continuation of this nationalism, right, with different covers of sectarian and sometimes geopolitics. So that's where the driving mechanism is. And I said, that's very interesting. And then, of course, no one can deny the influence or the impact of geopolitics, influence, and power, right? While is always the argument, Iran in particular wants to expand its geopolitics and power in the region, so Iran can improve its position on the negotiation table with the West, or the 5+1, and then that's the way to achieve influence and to achieve power in the region. And Saudi Arabia, on the other side, seeing more of a leader of the Arab world, or a leader of the Muslim world, standing for the sectarian national narrative from Iran. And also there is the economic development, especially on, as was put by one of the scholars that I spoke with, they said, you can use whatever you want to use of all these notions of sectarianism and nationalism and all that. Finally, it comes down to economic development, right? Iran wants to achieve, at the end of the day, economic development in Iran, and that's what is driving, the conflicts or the rivalry, and that's why it's important. So as you see, number of issues that all have impact in some way or another, which goes against the oversimplifications of just characterizing the conflict that it's a sectarian conflict about Sunni against Shia, or the opposite. Different parties use different tactics. The two parties were proxy wars, as we have seen, to achieve their objectives or the issues. Political polarization is another tactic used. Economic factors, oil prices, also religion is also used in some way or another. And then this gives us the face of, or one face of the rivalry, right, between the two countries and the regional dimension of the conflict or the rivalry. And then I try to come up with a face or for this tension or for this regional tension, which is the rivalry tension indicator that I called. The red is the darkest, where the tension is the highest, and you see that in 3 countries. And then to a second degree, you see Lebanon and Bahrain is on another level. And then you see on a third level, which is lighter the tension, you see it in Kuwait, you see it in Oman, and also you see it recently in the political position swinging, position of Egypt. Is another. And then you see that in Iran and Saudi Arabia, Jordan, mainly Qatar, UAE, where the tension is at the minimum. Then thinking about we talked about the conflict, but we didn't talk about the management or the strategies to contain the conflict or the resolution aspect. So I thought of, okay, how, given this characterization of the conflict or complex characterization of the conflict, let's think of strategies for containment, right? And strategies for containment, I thought of mediation, dialogue, confidence building measures, credible peace plans, zones of peace, developing areas of interdependence, and restoring the balance of power. I'll talk about them. Mediation, who can mediate this conflict? Theoretically, or ideally, the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, should be in a position as to mediate and to intervene between two different countries, right, are members or major members of the OIC. But you know, and I know, like the weakness of the OIC and not its ability to intervene or to mediate in this conflict. Then you have the United Nations, a lot of politics and international organization also in name. So actually the first category of potential mediators do not have a practical role in this conflict, only on the analysis, like in the fancy rooms of Georgetown University that you talk about that. But practically, actually, they don't exist, on this, unfortunately. And then you have another set of category, countries like Norway, Switzerland, Qatar, that can definitely play a role. And in the most recent speech by Sumo al-Amir, in the United Nations, talking about offering Qatar as a place for dialogue between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So this country, or this category, this set of categories can be effective, actually, in mediation. And they have a record of mediation in a number of parts of the world. But there is only one important thing that's needed for this category to be able to work, which is the willingness of the parties to mediate, or the willingness of the parties to engage in a serious mediation between the countries. And that does not exist so far, or as of now does not exist, which makes this category is more difficult, for them to really achieve some mediation. And you have the third set of categories, which is not coming from a mediation or opening channels of communications and having a place for negotiations, more of like a third party, a powerful third party intervention, actually, that can intervene. And here you're talking about actually the building and working within the balance of power in the region and engaging with the parties on more of a powerful and building alliances and mutual collaboration or cooperation. And this set of countries, actually, they can do something, right, over this. Especially, I would say, Turkey, where it's playing is a major country that can play a major role in this and can bring the Iran and Saudi closer, if not, not talking about resolving, but just bringing the parties together and containing the conflict. Pakistan is also another country that can also engage in such conversation because they have a regional role. The U.S. can do it theoretically, right? But whether the U.S. is interested or have this, before the Islamic Revolution, before '79, the U.S. was engaged, actually. And this through the Twin Pillars policy during Nixon time and fighting the Soviet Union, where the U.S. had a direct interest in fighting the Soviet Union, where it was able to bring the two parties together. But now the Soviet Union is no longer exist, and not sure that the U.S. is interested in the first place in this. Then the second, another strategy, can we talk about dialogue, right? There is really nothing can be achieved, nothing can be done without having the two parties talking to each other. What is the challenge? What is the problem of the dialogue? Is that with dialogue, when you're sitting and talking to the other party, means, right, that you are legitimizing the other party's actions or intervention. So when Saudi Arabia sits and talks to Iran, right, about the crisis in Yemen. So you are legitimizing in some way, right, the role that Iran has a role and Iran is part of the region. Maybe this is not or should not be a huge problem, right, because Iran is a neighbor, and where is the problem of Iran, being part of the region? I mean, Iran is saying Iran is not going anywhere, but then it becomes the question of, right, if I am recognizing, the role of Iran, then what am I getting in return? How is this affecting or how is this helping me, right? So that is has been a major obstacle, a major challenge to really getting the parties to talk about the legitimacy of the conversation. Then, of course, there is no agreement on the agenda and what to include. At the end of the day, there is no alternative to the parties talking, to Riyadh and Tehran talking and engaging. Maybe what you can do in this case is that open some channels of communications through a third party. If you're concerned about the legitimacy of the third party, so you need to find some different or challenge some ways through different channels of communications to engage with the parties. And actually, another way to do it is one of the parties, or Saudi or Iran, can really take an initiative, right, is to try to reach out to the other countries. So it doesn't have to be always thinking about only third-party intervention and who's going to mediate and all of that. But an initiative can definitely do something. Confidence-building measures is extremely important because this is not at all used, and confidence-building measures can definitely produce and can contribute to a better understanding and to reducing the tension between the two countries. Because remember, the issues or the rivalry is running within a very complex environment with very high level of mistrust. Basically, the two parties do not trust each other in any way, right? So that is why you need to have some confidence-building measures, and confidence-building measures can be taken on the theory level, on the statements, actions, policies, all can be engaged in building or taking such measures. And for the conflicts that we're seeing today, you definitely need to have, especially on Iran's side, some credible peace plans, right? Iran is widely viewed in this part of the world, in the Middle East, as always part of the problem of funding for civil wars happening in different parts of the region. The Syrian conflict or the Syrian war is definitely not helping Iran, because Iran is engaged there and is using economic, military, and different types of resources in the conflict. Instead of being part of the conflict, you really need to be part of the solution, right? Part of the solution, you can come up with a peace plan that can really contribute to promoting or resolving some of the issues, whether it's in Lebanon or in Yemen or in Syria. And once you develop this, you address the mistrust. You address it's the confidence-building measures that are there. You address actually the dialogue that we are talking about. And I can share with you just about a month ago or a month and a half ago, we were having a conversation at Harvard. I was there, and we were talking about the rivalry and issues, and we discussed the peace plan, and we both agreed, the speakers, that Iran has to do this. Iran is in a position to come up with peace plans in terms of initiative, not necessarily Saudi Arabia, in order to address this and be part of the solution, and then be part of the regional arrangements, as we saw or as we discussed before, that be part of the, you have in Yemen and Lebanon and all of that. And then another strategy that we can address as part of a way to reduce the tension is the notion that I wanted to call zones of peace, establishing zones of peace in the region between Saudi Arabia, and Iran. What is zones of peace? The way I define it is a way to regulate and contain the conflict. So it's not now or in its initial phase about resolving the conflict. So it's more about managing and containing, where you can establish zones within the region, right, that free from direct intervention in their own internal affairs, right? So let's have countries that both Saudi Arabia and Iran agree that they do not intervene in their own internal affairs, which that we can call zones of peace that can be contained, because one major characteristic of any conflict is always to keep in mind is a spillover, right? So once we have a conflict in one place, it will spill over to the neighboring place. So let's characterize, these places where the two parties that can agree that become zones of peace. And try to, to project this on a map. How do zones of peace would look like? This is probably how would they look like as they exist now, right? And where to move forward. Actually, where there is, and here the indicator that we're using is the level of intervention in internal affairs. You see that actually the darkest, where there's, and more of established zones of peace, that you don't have direct intervention in internal affairs. Egypt, Jordan, Iran, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, where no direct intervention from the parties inside this. So that's one. Then to a lighter degree, where you see some, or at least perceived, I know that there are many disputed issues here about whether this is, would ask Iran if there is an intervention in Saudi, and I would say no, and Saudi Arabia would say yes. But at least there is a perceived intervention, like to a lighter degree in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. And on a third place, you see Lebanon and Bahrain. And last, you find, of course, the most serious is in Syria and Kuwait and Bahrain. How does this help us? Is that A, we need to recognize the established zones of peace between the two countries and move towards, the achievable goals, more achievable goals, which is the second degree or the second level, talking about Saudi Arabia, for example, and Kuwait. And then probably move to the second and so forth. But our awareness of the concept of the notion and our awareness of the need to acknowledge and move forward to next achievable goals, we're talking more about, again, regulating and containing and preventing a spillover from one place to another about this. So that is, the countries that we discussed. And another, or the sixth strategy that I talk about, is working about or developing areas of interdependence between Iran and Saudi Arabia. When you look at the conflict, that's what you see over here. You see two distinct positions, right, between Riyadh and Tehran about any conflict in the region, especially when you talk about Syria and Yemen. There is no overlap, right? Two countries fighting or over, their proxy or different ways. But you see two completely different positions, right? Now, my point here is that don't be led or misled, actually, by the obvious positions of the two countries. Because on the positions, that's what you see, but the interest and the needs of the parties are much deeper and much interrelated, right? Remember when we talked about the first issue of this conflict, talking about actually security concerns, that it's in both sides, right, of the issues, that both responding to security need, right, in some way. Maybe not fully driving the conflict, but in some way, actually, they are responding to security needs, So the needs, actually, when you look between Saudi Arabia and Iran, you will find huge area that's actually of mutual interest and mutual needs of the two parties that you can work on this area to develop, right? And in order to drive a resolution, to the regional conflicts over here, from here, actually, from the shared needs and the shared interests. There is economic, environmental cooperations, a clean, safe Gulf, right, is at the core interest of the two parties. There is a huge potential, and I know businesses here, they can talk a lot about the potential for future economic cooperations between the two countries and how we can develop this. So the point is here, again, what you see in the media, that's what you see in the media. But look at this and engage the businesses, engage the security experts, and determine other areas or shared interests and shared needs and work on that. Finally, I think we're looking at the start of the recent escalation began in Iraq, right, in 2003, as many argue. Then probably you need to work on the balance of power, because that's when the regional order changed and the balance of power shifted towards Iran at the expense of Saudi Arabia. And that's probably where you need also to look at, right? What affects or how to impact the regional order, right? An effective, a neutral, independent Iraq that does not support or tilt into one or the other. So Iraq, in particular, here has a huge role to play in minimizing the tension and reducing the tension, and contributing to better management of the conflict. And all what they need to do in terms of Iraq is actually just build, right, a free, independent, democratic Iraq, right? That's actually that can be used to approach the two parties rather than divide the two parties. So fixing the regional order, whether through Iraq, the outcome in Syria is another way, right, of that you can affect the regional order. We'll see how this goes, but keeping this in mind, I think, might also help us of how to manage. And then I do not recommend at all arms race, because that's always is the solution. Okay, balance of power, then arms race. That's wrong. That's an approach that will drain both parties, and the two parties will not achieve what they want to achieve, because both parties have the capabilities, right, is to spend and spend and spend on arms race and not be able to achieve probably what they want to achieve. Then engage in actually balancing of power, engage in reform, achieve national reconciliation, reinforce of the notion of citizenship. So all you can improve your internal place, and then you can engage in a better this. And I will end with the last one, is something to keep in mind: building peace or reducing tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We always think of here, right, on track one, governments, like bringing the parties or intervening. And even when we talked about mediation, we talked about Norway, Switzerland, US, Turkey, Pakistan. That's all in this area. But the potential of building peace between the two countries is much bigger than just working on track one. There is track two that you can engage, and also there is the grassroots level that you engage. And here I would like to encourage you to think, how many Iranian students do you have at Georgetown here or at Qatar University? And how many Saudi students or Qatari students you have, right, studying at the University of Tehran? Right? How many educational programs between Tehran and Riyadh, or between Tehran and the Gulf, that exist? Like how much the parties or the two countries know about each other? To what extent they are engaged on the grassroots level? To what extent they're engaged on the research centers, the media, right? The media, you see media in Tehran talking its own, and media in the Gulf talking about, with its own thing. So no interrelation. So building actually a stronger foundation, a stronger chance for reduced tension between the two countries, and hopefully on the way of achieving reconciliation between us, is that to invest also on other levels that have much better chance and stronger that they can support future collaboration and reduction of tension between the two countries. And with that, I thank you for your listening and happy to take questions.